I guess we're good to go, Marvin. I'll start welcoming you all to this, our first session, our first webinar to the community of P&G Alumni Business Catapult. Let me tell you a little bit more about that and who we are. The mission of the P&G Alumni Business Catapult is to create this ecosystem of P&G alumni founders and funders to build the companies of tomorrow who will touch and improve life. We truly believe on the power of connecting P&G alumni on this ecosystem. Next one, please. So in the network, we're integrating angel investors, where we also want to bring consulting advisory to the P&G alumni founders and connect them to opportunities of capital. Next one, please. So this is the team. Today, I'm going to be the moderator. My name is Laura Tapia. I've been connected to the P&G alumni network since 8 years ago. And now I'm a co-chair of the Business Catapult. Marvin, who is our speaker today, you hear a lot more about him. He's also part of the team. And then we have here the rest of the Catapult team. Next one, please. So we want to invite you to connect to our Slack channel. We're going to show this invitation also at the end. But if you have not done it yet, please do connect to our Slack channel where we are connecting all P&G alumni founders and also investors. And we go to the next one. And I'm going to post in the chat the link to the channel in case you didn't catch the QR code. Go ahead, Marvin, start.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and start this. Can you see my screen?
No, Marvin. We were seeing it before, but now, right now, no.
I gotta go grab it again. Sorry about that. Right.
We can see it.
You can see the screen now, right? Great. Well, like Laura said, I just want to thank everybody for joining today. I'm hoping this is a great opportunity for a lot of you who are founders, investors, startup enthusiasts, people who are just curious about being here. And I'm going to share a lot about what we've found as an organization since my career at P&G in looking at startups and what investors are looking at for those. So just to give you a quick background, as Laura said, so I run a company called Wonder Fund, and we've already hosted over 50 plus deals. We've raised over $15 million for different companies across the industries, multiple industries, from everything from fintech to software as a service to breweries to restaurants, as well as minority and women-owned businesses. And what's important about this is that at this point in time, there's a lot of capital needs in terms of funding a company. And there is certainly a pattern to how those things happen. But before I jump into that, give you a little bit of background on myself on this, I spent most of my time at P&G as a brand marketer in healthcare, worked on brands like Pure and Metamucil and Thermacare. And I spent some time in sourcing in the company, doing diligence and working with our suppliers. And I was also a corporate trainer. After I left P&G, I became an entrepreneur. I started, as you can see, Wonder Fund. We raised capital for Wonder Fund and close to $500,000 as part of that round. And then we also raised money for, I started a brewery in Cincinnati, another consumer goods product. I love beer and I love technology and I love how those two things come together. And we've raised capital for that as well. Overall, I work with a lot of startups today through Wonder Fund. I also mentor and advise different companies from companies that come through some major accelerator programs here in the US and abroad through Techstars, as you might know, Centrifuge, which is a local regional incubator and accelerator program that does a lot of stuff here in Cincinnati and in the region. 500 startups out of California, and even some of the local capital angel groups. Now, for today, what I want to do is help you understand the elements of pitches and great pitches that get investment. So there's, like as I was saying before, there's certainly a format to it. And when we think about these formats, we'll talk about the elements of great decks. Okay. And what's important first and foremost is that we need to first understand who our audience is. A lot of you who are running a company or running a startup at this point, you probably have a deck that's geared towards your customers or your consumers. And that deck today has a pitch, it has a value proposition, it shows a problem, a solution, and then you go through a demo of that product in order to entice people to buy. The same elements that you have in that deck for your customers and your consumers, it's something that you also use for partners when you're trying to recruit people to join your team, or you're trying to partner up with a third party who's going to work with you as a company in order to deliver those goods or services. Now, when it comes to investment, it's not that different. All you're doing is you're rearranging the elements of that deck and you're crafting it for a third party, or that being stakeholders or investors. I like to think of it during my days in new business development. Now now they call it P&G Ventures. Is that when we were launching new products or new brands, we would have to go to the GM, we have to put together a one pager, we have to put together a deck and the value proposition, and a lot of that is really something that is crafted for how we would purpose it within the walls of P&G. But in the outside world, we think about these as investors, as angel investors, as well as venture capital. So here's a bit of what I would call as a deck or a canvas of what a typical pitch deck looks like. I've seen thousands of these decks at this point in the last 10 years since I left P&G, and they all have elements of the same elements that are common to good decks. And so I'm just going to double click in each of these as we go through it. I put it into a more of a wheel format, and that's simply because what you'll find is there needs to be some fluidity when it comes to pitching your company, because sometimes investors will start focusing on one area or the other. They might want to know more about the business model, or they might want to know how you're going to market, or what the size of the industry is. But all these elements and how you arrange them in fluidity with each of these conversations is going to be important with how you sell the business to a potential investor. So let's start off with a problem. Okay. So we always look at companies and we always like to see and hear the story of what the consumer or the meaningful problem is. As you know, we used to talk at P&G, the consumer's boss. It's not that different when it comes to this. We think about the consumer as a consumer on a journey. And what our job is as startups or as founders is to share the story of the consumer and how that consumer has to overcome some kind of meaningful problem that becomes a treasure for them. It's not just a treasure for them, but it's also a treasure for everyone else, meaning that there is a bigger market that's out there. It's not just an individual problem that's being solved. It's a problem that is ubiquitous. It's all encompassing, and that you as a brand, you as a product or a service are the one that's helping to aid that consumer. Think of yourself as a mentor in that, or an advisor to a consumer. You're providing a product that's going to help them overcome that problem. Example of this. This is an example from when we were pitching Wonder Fund. I want you to meet Brian. You know, Brian is a founder of a brewing company. He worked at a big manufacturing company and doing beer here in Cincinnati. for a long time, but he always aspired to opening up his own brewery. But Brian had trouble because he was having difficulty raising capital. And in fact, not only Brian had this issue, he had to raise over $1 million for it, but this is a story of one person, because there are thousands of Brians out there in the world. In fact, there are millions of Brians in the US, and access to capital is a big problem. So it's not just a story of one, it's a story for all. And you can see here that with over 2 million small businesses started annually, 81% not accessing banks, 31% of women and minorities, and 13% of VC dollars only going, or only 13% of those dollars going to people of color. So where do people find capital? And this is what I'm talking about, just taking a step back, is that when you start with a problem, you tell the story of one person, and it becomes a story of everyone. And of course, when there's a problem, there's a solution, right? That solution is something that we need to be able to solve uniquely, right? And what I mean by that is that every company, if I've seen thousands of these pitches, and I've never seen a solution that is absolutely new and groundbreaking. Everything, like the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun, and it's very true of startups. So what's important about the solution is that you, as a company, have to differentiate yourself from others in a unique way, right? And so when we think about solutions, we power public crowdfunding for small deals, everything from bakers to brewers to restaurateurs, as well as tech founders. So the ability to differentiate it using equity crowdfunding is how we do that in our space. Make sense? So business model. Let's just double click on a business model. How a company makes money is at the very forefront of a lot of investors. Just because you've come up with a solution or to a problem, you need to be able to demonstrate how the company's revenue streams are flowing into that solution. So there are several different models that are out there. Here's just an example of how companies make money. If you're a SaaS company, let's say a software as a service, it's very likely that you have a subscription. That could be a subscription on a monthly basis. It could be on a annual basis, but in many cases, that's where you've put together you've signed up with your credit card, and it's going to debit that amount each month. Subscription software as a service is one of the most sought after investments for investors, and that's simply because when you have reoccurring money like that, all you have to do is just collect it. All right. There are other ways that companies make money, transaction fees, especially fintech companies when it comes to swiping. When you swipe the card, there's a percentage. That's a very typical way of how companies will make money on a transaction. Think about Airbnb. They do that on a per transaction basis. And there are lots of companies out there who do that. There are companies who license their technology to others. That's another type of business model that can happen, royalty streams as well. And then, of course, there's direct purchase. I know a lot of us are consumer goods people. And as consumer goods and in our background in CPG, it is a direct purchase. When consumers purchase product, there is a definite impact in terms of how that's going to affect revenues and then the bottom line. But we're always having to create product in order to meet that demand. So direct purchase is a very direct model, like beer, as I was telling you before, is a direct purchase model. And that can go either to consumers or it can go to other retailers or bigger customers. So thinking about how your company makes money and being able to demonstrate that on a slide and the multiple revenue streams is key to a good pitch. But then bear in mind, as I said before, the most investable companies from venture capital and angel groups are in this top left quadrant of subscriptions because it's recurring and it's something that can continue to go. It's just collecting money as opposed to having to do all the legwork to do a direct purchase. Here's an example of Airbnb, how they make money. This was one of the slides that they put out in their 2009 deck. I want to, if you do a search on Airbnb and their pitch deck, yeah, you can get a copy of it. In fact, I can send it to you after this call. But they basically take a 10% commission on each transaction. And they talk about how there are 10.6 million trips with Airbnb, and that's the share of the market that they would have. And with the average fee of $20, that's how they got to $200 million revenues. And of course, they are a public company today worth billions. But that's the basis of their business model. And bear in mind that every company has at least one core business model or revenue stream. But what's really key is for your ability to create multiple revenue streams when it comes to building your business. Okay, so let's talk about beyond business model. Let's talk about TAM, SAM, SOM. And this is what we call about the sizing of the industry. A typical deck will include the market opportunity in three components. And that first, the bigger overall addressable market is, or what they call the TAM, is the value of the entirety of that market. It's the total possible demand for a product or a service. If I were to talk about the auto industry, I'm talking about globally all of the vehicles in the global market for auto. When I talk about serviceable addressable market, the portion of that TAM that's actually within reach of that product. So if you are, let's say, Tesla, for example, Tesla started in the US. So at one point in time, their serviceable addressable market was only in the US. Now, of course, they're global, so that they can now service this whole globe. But at one point, they were just only a regional based product. So that's what a serviceable addressable market is. It's limited by geography or demographics. And then lastly, it's what we call the SOM, or the share of market. And that's really about what you as a company can obtain as your market share. And this is a shorter term target, but it does speak to how much you can obtain in your particular industry or within your market. And so when you're able to get that amount of share, becomes a number as an indicator of forward growth. Okay. Now, another example of Airbnb, when Airbnb pitched their company, first and foremost, they said, well, there are 2 billion trips worldwide that are booked each year. And of those 2 billion, so that's the total addressable market of number of trips built. And then they said, okay, but those that are serviced by them, or which ones are on budget or online, is about 560 million of the 2 billion. And of that, they believe 15% of that market was something that they could capture. Okay. That is TAM, SAM, SOM. Okay. So the way we think about it is that, yes, it's nice to say, hey, we can capture 15% of the market. I always hear people say, well, I could capture 1%. If I had this $10 billion industry and I captured just 1% of that, we would then have 100 million as a revenue. And when you think about that, that is just a very broad stroke of how to do the SOM part of it. But the reality is that the best way to do SOM or market share is to average what you think is a reasonable percentage of the overall industry you could capture, and then averaging it with a bottom-up forecast based upon the number of units that you could actually supply. So if you're a consumer goods company and you know that your capacity is only so much, and you're factoring growth over the next few years, and maybe you do build a little bit more capacity in there, you might say then that is your bottom up. But if the market demand for it allows you to then generate enough revenue and profit that you could invest in more capacity, then that's where you would start to go from top down to bottom up. Hope that makes sense. But serviceable, or the serviceable obtainable market, is really about market share, and it's really based upon reality as well as the big potential of a potential market. Okay. Additional piece of industry, what we always like to see in decks is a competition perceptual map. And there is a famous perceptual map, which I'll share with you as a quick video. But basically, it's a 2x2 square where you and your product are always in the top right part or right quadrant. This is the most famous one is of the iPhone that Steve Jobs presented back in the day, 2008. And you're picking in your product, two vectors, and it could be anything from price and quality. It could be speed versus cost. It could be style versus comfort. It could be convenience or choice, or in Steve Jobs' presentation was smart versus not smart, or hard to use versus easy to use. So let me share this one. That way you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is. No. Actually, here it is, but we're going to leave it there for now. So, before we get into it, let me talk about a category of things. The most advanced phones are called smartphones, so they say. And they typically combine a phone plus some email capability, plus they say it's the internet, sort of the baby internet, into one device, and they all have these plastic little keyboards on them. And the problem is that they're not so smart and they're not so easy to use. So if you kind of make a business school 101 graph of the smart axis and the easy to use axis, phones, regular cell phones are kind of right there. They're not so smart and they're not so easy to use. But smartphones are definitely a little smarter, but they actually are harder to use. They're really complicated. Just for the basic stuff, people have a hard time figuring out how to use them. Well, we don't want to do either one of these things. What we want to do is make a leapfrog product that is way smarter than any mobile device has ever been and super easy to use. This is what iPhone is. Okay? So we're going to reinvent the phone. Now.
Okay. So I think you get an idea of competition, and we've seen lots of different slides from companies who will really try to put together these grids that talk about, here's my company versus every other company, here's all the features, and here's the check boxes and so forth. That's one way you could do it. What we really love to see are these perceptual maps, because in many ways it gives an indicator of how you think about your product versus others in your industry, and where it stacks up against those others in the industry. It's a very simple tool. Like Job said, it's like business school 101. But what's really neat about using a very simple tool like that is that in the mind of a consumer, you can really start to see how your product stacks up. Okay, so those two components, as I was saying before, it's really about TAM, SAM, SOM, and the perceptual map. Okay.
Marvin, we have a question that I believe is relevant to answer right now. It
Sure.
says, how do you support in a sound and rational way the share of market forecast? This could be so debatable.
Yeah, the share of market forecast in a sound and rational way. This is what we used to call the kitchen logic that our GMs used to, ask us is, at the end of the day, does it make sense that you can actually capture that? And, as I was talking about this before, is that it's one thing to say, hey, I can capture, if you look at the right side here, a certain percentage of a $2 billion user market. And, that might seem unreasonable, and simply because you might not have the marketing dollars to reach that many people. So ultimately, you need to really think about what you're capable of doing. And when I was talking about this, I talked about it in terms of capacity. And capacity is one way to talk about it, right? And if you're a bakery and you can only make so many cupcakes in a given year or a month or a given day, there's certainly a limit to what that bottom-up methodology could be. But then, factoring growth for that might be, if you were able to open up 3 bakeries or 5 bakeries as a franchise model in the next 5 years, then you could then multiply that out by that 5 or 10x. And so what's important about this is there has to be some kitchen logic behind it, and you have to be able to support that kitchen logic with your plan to go to market. And we'll talk about that plan to go to market here in a moment. But what is important mostly on this is that it has to have some sound kitchen logic. Great question.
Thank you, Marvin.
And feel free to stop me if you
audience,
have other questions.
yeah, audience, you can put your questions as the one that we just heard before in the Q&A part.
Okay. All right, so then let's talk about traction. Traction is the venture capital version of concept test results. All right, so I remember back in the day, our CMK partners would put together a concept test. That concept test they would do with consumers, and then they might do an actual use test in market in one select geography. Maybe it's like a city like Indianapolis, where you're doing a market test with a test product. And the idea behind that is that we are really just trying to show metrics that can demonstrate that there's consumer demand for a given product or service. And that's not that different for startups, with the one exception is that startups don't have a lot of money. So when it comes to that, there has to be a creative way of showing that there's consumer demand. And so for a lot of venture capital and investors on our side, we're always looking at key scorecard metrics, which are in the following categories. Okay, so revenue, it's always good to show and demonstrate that your company has some kind of revenue, and it might not be a lot of revenue, but the fact of the matter is that consumer market fit or customer market fit, product market fit, as they sometimes say, it just means that you created a market or you're part of a market where there is a demand. So if you've created a product and people are buying it and willing to open their wallets and separate their dollars in order to purchase that, then there's some kind of demand there. Now, how it becomes optimized then becomes the next step of that. And that's where you'll always see people ask for, well, how many active users do you have on this? And maybe you have a platform, it's a SaaS platform. The reason why a lot of tech investors are thinking about active users is because when you have a big population of active users, like let's say, for instance, Facebook has 3 billion active users through everything from not only Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. But those active users are either daily or monthly. And it's an important metric because of those active users, they can track how much revenue they're generating per user, right? Because when you're thinking about this as a business, you want those users to be part of your ecosystem, and then you're always going to be able to monetize them at some point in time. It might not be today, it might be tomorrow, but at some point you're going to be activating them and generating some revenue off of those users. What's really difficult is when you have a one-time user and then you always have to keep marketing to find a new user. Okay, and that becomes a more difficult business model when it comes to investment, because you're always having to spend so much in order to keep those users into your ecosystem. So average revenue per user is an important one. There's also a metric that we like to look at called cost to acquire a consumer. So that is how much marketing dollars are you putting out there in order to capture one consumer. And so sometimes the best in class, it just depends on the industry. But, for instance, there's some companies that could tell you that it costs them, $15 for every customer that they are able to grab. Now, the average revenue per customer might be $80. So if you're telling me that you could get each customer for $15 and then the average revenue is 80, that's a good value equation when it comes to acquiring that customer. Then if you're a B2B company, a lot of the metrics that we look at are what we call average contract value, because the size and scale of those particular contracts are going to be much larger than an individual user. Now, the downside of being a B2B company, not that there is a downside, is the fact that it might take a longer time frame in order to capture that customer. It might be a 3 to 6 or 12-month type of runway just to get that customer into your book. And then that pipeline of consumers or pipeline of customers becomes an important piece of B2B companies to be able to say, okay, that this is what the potential future pipeline looks like. And then, of course, the last metric that we're always looking for from a traction standpoint is how much money has been raised to date. And that, of course, implies that there's a certain amount of dilution, because when you're an investor, you want to know How much of my money is going to buy a percentage of your company? So just an example of what a slide might look like. Yes.
Um, I- we have a question that says, please talk about how VCs or angels measure traction when you don't have a product yet.
Yeah, it's a great question. If you don't have a product, that's what we would call an idea stage company. And so companies are either an idea stage, which is basically a notion or a concept, versus a startup stage, which is when a startup stage is when you're starting to generate revenue. You've built an MVP or some kind of product, or you have you get LOIs from potential customers. And then, of course, there's the growth stage. All right. Now, when you're talking about idea stage, it's a really important notion that you're talking about here, because it's become a very, very competitive world when it comes to capital raising right now. In fact, 2023 was the lowest amount of capital raised in the industry in 10 years. And a lot of that has to do with the way the economy has been going the last few years. COVID hit, of course, a lot of different companies, a lot of attrition. Venture capital was included in that. A lot of people, money drying up, and then as people have been waiting, they've been keeping their money on the sidelines. And so there's a lot of demand for companies to be in the startup stage or having a post product, meaning you've already built the MVP and you're able to start at least generating LOIs at the very least. So my thought on this is that I think a lot of companies at the earliest stage need to at least put together an MVP, invest those dollars in creating, even if it's a wireframe or a working prototype of your product. That's what I mean by MVP, a minimum viable product. And then look to get letters of intent and an LOI from potential customers. And it doesn't mean that you have the full product built and you're able to service it. But if you were putting together a deck of your product or potential service, and you got in front of a potential customer, and that customer said, "Well, if this thing existed, I would be willing to sign up with you in order to be a consumer or customer," that LOI is something that you can bring to investors and VCs just to demonstrate there's a demand for this product. So I'm not saying it's impossible to run or start a company and raise capital without a product or an MVP. But I'm just telling you, it's a very difficult and competitive world. So have some measure of traction, that being LOIs, as a way of showing and demonstrating some kind of demand.
Thank you, Marvin. We have other
Yep.
questions that I'm going to keep to the end so that you can finish
Sure.
like we're 9:35 right now. So we'll let you finish and go through the other questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Okay. So then, and we're already over halfway through this. So let's talk about how. All right. So how, or sometimes we call this the go-to-market. And this is just a quick demonstration slide of how companies think about distribution. Okay. So there are a lot of companies that are doing direct to consumer at the very bottom. And if you think about it in terms of margins, yes, you probably have high margins by selling your product directly to a consumer through your website, right? Now, the only downside to that is your reach is going to be really low because you're only going one-to-one. You have your website and one consumer. And if the value of that product is, let's say, $30, then yes, okay, and maybe you are making a 70% margin on that, but only reaching one consumer and the amount of time and effort to reach that one consumer and marketing dollars might actually go up because you're not reaching a lot of people. So that's where companies will then decide to go direct to retail. So that means that they're going to go and it will require their sales team to sell into that retailer. In many ways, that's the P&G model where we would sell into a Target or a Walmart. If you're a CPG company, I've seen several of these that are either products, they're hair care products or beauty care products. That the challenge with getting in front of a Walmart or Target is you actually have to be big enough to get a buyer to talk to you. So that's where going through a distributor might be a better way to do it. And so distributors have access to many retailers. And of course, getting to those distributors means that you should probably be going to trade shows. And those trade shows require you to pitch to those distributors in order to get them to do it. Now, every time your product leaves your hands and goes to an intermediary or some distributor, there is a margin that's going to be cut each time, right? I've been in the beer industry for the last 5 years. Yes, we sell direct to consumer at the bar, but we also sell direct to customers like Kroger, but we also sell through a distributor in states that we don't have a license to do it. So in many ways, we have 3 ways that we reach these consumers, but it enables us to capture consumers from the bottom to all the way to the top. And the more and more that you're able to use distributors at the top, you will reach more customers and more consumers at the end of the day because their reach is much greater than yours individually. Okay, so how you plan to distribute or how you go to market needs to be demonstrated in your deck, because then it gives an indicator to how well we know that you're able to reach those consumers that you say you're going to reach. And this is what I was talking about before about kitchen logic. If you're saying, hey, I can capture 10% of the market, then being able to demonstrate that you could capture 10% of the market, either through distribution, through third-party distributors, or direct to distributor, or direct to consumer, that's how you would want to build your forecast. Okay. Now, in that go-to-market, what's also important about this is, if you remember, we talk a lot about at P&G, the who, what, and how. Who's the consumer? The what is our product, and how we do it, or how we go to market. This is really what we're talking about. At the end of the day, you need to show that how you fill your funnel at the top is about awareness. It's about how you're marketing the company. It's what your brand strategy is, your brand equity pyramid. And in that, who you're targeting from a consumer perspective, your segments, right? And how you engage them might be the different channels that you're going through. So that if there's a lot of new companies who start up, and part of their strategy is to use social media. Okay, yeah, social media is one aspect of it, but there's also, of course, your website and SEO. There's also, as I said before, using distributors. There's also newsletter campaigns. There's a whole number of channels that you want to talk about, and those channels and choices when it comes to your mix are all about how you're reaching and engaging those consumers, right? And the third aspect of this is converting those consumers. Conversion is really about a consumer opening up their wallet, swiping their credit card, it's typing in their credit card, writing you a PO. Once you're able to convert those consumers, that's where you start to see the value. And then it's about brand loyalty. That's that second moment of truth. That's when they come back to you. That's when they start signing up again, repurchasing, being an ambassador, telling their friends, referring others. And that go-to-market strategy, your ability to articulate at each stage of the funnel, the choices that you're making at each stage, is really about how your go-to-market strategy is going to be filled out. We talked about channels. This is kind of the best approach in terms of how marketing is done today. And I know this study was done about 9 years ago, but it's still very true in terms of how marketing dollars are spent as of today. All right, now let's talk about the last 2 aspects of this, and it's about team and vision. This is all about credibility. And the key aspect of what investors are looking for in a team is really about whether you and your team members have the subject matter expertise that's going to fulfill this particular value proposition. And so if you've surrounded yourself with successful advisors, that's another key point. But ideally, you might be the founder and you have formerly experience with XYZ and company. Of course, P&G is one of the credentials that we always talk about. But then maybe you've partnered up with a technology person who's from Apple or Google or whatever. And then you also have a business development person who's worked at SAP for 30 years and is heading up your sales team. And what's important about that is that what you're doing is you're building a reason to believe as to why investors should put money into you. Last thing you want is to have a room full of the same type of people, maybe the same people who were maybe just buddies in business school or buddies from one department, because what it doesn't show is the level of diversity of skill sets and experiences. And what you want is to show and demonstrate that your founding team has those types of skill sets that are going to fill out the roles. So whether it's brand or web or design or services, and maybe the experience sets were from a whole bunch of different companies, all of those in concert together is really going to demonstrate your ability to be successful. And what I always like to see is that is when people start talking about their team, is they talk about the team, say, well, here I'm, so-and-so, and I've got experience with P&G, and my co-founders have experience here and there and whatnot. But let me tell you where we're going with this company. We're starting with this one product, but in the future, where we want to go is we want to build technologies that are going to explore the stars to establish a self-sustaining human civilization on Mars. That's SpaceX. That's their whole vision statement. Or if it's Chesky and Airbnb, they're saying, well, we're building a world where you can enjoy home life anywhere around the world. Or if it's Spotify, we're building a company where you don't need to access individual songs anymore or albums anymore. You can have it all at your fingertips at every given moment in life. Or if you're a transportation company like Uber, we're not just doing taxis, but we're making it transportation as reliable as running water everywhere for everyone at any time. And the idea of these vision statements is to then leave your potential investors with a picture of what the future is going to look like, that it's going to go beyond this one product that you're launching, that you're asking them to invest in this one product, because this one product that you're asking them to invest in is just the first step that's going to ladder up and give them a sense of where the future of your mind is and where your team is going, right? And that's what I'm talking about when I say you talk about your team, their credibility, and where they're going, right? And lastly, it's really about ask, right? And this is where rubber meets the road. I've certainly sat in lots of pitches where companies will come and say, hey, here's what I'm looking for, blah, blah, blah. Here's my company, here's my product, here's how we make money. But then when it comes to asking for the money, they don't tell me how much they need. They don't tell me what they're going to use the money for, and they don't make it memorable. And so what's important here is that when you're asking for money, you need to break it down. And again, it needs to fit the kitchen logic of, well, what are you going to use the money for? You told me that you're a SaaS company. All right, if you're a SaaS company, you probably need web development. If you're B2B, it probably means you're going to have to hire a sales team. If you're a consumer goods, probably means that there's distribution costs and there's inventory you need to build. And of course, there's advertising and marketing. So being able to justify all those costs into a breakdown is what use of funds is all about. And then in that, you should always have, and you don't need to put this in the deck on the forefront, but you can put it in the addendum, is the pro forma for 3 to 5 years. Always look at 3 to 5 years as the outlook, and there's a reason for that. And that's because if you're an investor and you're looking to invest in a company right now, a startup, well, you're expecting that company to then grow within that 3 to 5 years and then go out and need to raise more money that's going to accelerate growth into the hockey stick. And so that whole pro forma for 3 to 5 years is really going to be, as we talked before, the kitchen logic as to how you're going to grow the company to a point where it's going to be exponential for their investment. And they're going to see what those investors want to see as a 10x return on their investment. All right. And then I always like to think about this as a star. I call it a star moment, and it's something they always remember. All right. And there's sometimes I'll see people say, okay, if you take out your phone and then you look at this QR code, it'll go directly to their application or their app, and it's automatically downloaded to their phone. And it's kind of like, wow, okay, that's really cool. I'm able to use that right away. Or there's a famous TED Talk by Bill Gates where he talks about the need to make sure that malaria could be eradicated from the world in Africa. And he actually takes a jar full of mosquitoes that are infected with malaria. And he's in the US at this point. He says, hey, and he opens it up and these mosquitoes fly out into the crowd. And he said, okay, well, I just opened up a jar full of mosquitoes with malaria. And people kind of gasp and they're like, oh, he says, but here's the news. The good news is that because you're here in the US, all of you have already been vaccinated with the malaria vaccine, but imagine that there are billions of people in Africa who need this access to malaria drugs. And that's what and he says, that's what I'm looking for, is for help, because this is a disease that can be eradicated from the world. It's one of those moments that you look at and you say, wow, you know, your mind's exploding, because you're like, okay, well, I'm safe, but there's half a world away. There's billions of people who are not. Okay. And then I've seen some humorous pitches where people say, and especially at demo days, where they're saying, hey, you know what? I'm not supposed to ask for investment today, but I am selling T-shirts for $50,000 today. If you want to talk, here's my information. And then, you know, it's just a funny, quirky way, but it puts a face with a name, and it gives that moment where you're making a connection with people. So that is what I would call a great pitch deck, or elements of a great pitch deck. All right, I'm open for questions.
Marvin, so we'll do the following. We're going to run a very quick poll so that we get to know a little bit more about the audience. You can start looking into the questions right now, and but let's launch this poll so we know a little bit more about them. The very first one should be on your screen now, and it's about where in the world you're at. Or where in the world you come from. And I'm going to close the poll when we have about 80% responses. Okay, I think we have enough. I'll run the next one. Well, I'll share results. This is most of you, 48% from North America, 12% from Latin America, 30% from Europe, but we have also people from Asia and Africa. Welcome. Now, the next question is, hold on a second. And then the next question is this one. So are you part? No, this is of a local P&G alumni network. If you are not, and you are a P&G alum, please join. I'm going to put the link on the chat. Thank you. Now, we are going to go back to okay. Back to you, Marvin. I'll ask some more questions later, but please start answering some of the questions. Can you say the question, what you're answering, please? I cannot hear you, Marvin.
Sorry, I put it on mute. So the first question is, what if you're after an imprimatur endorsement from a strategic partner rather than raising money? For example, say have Harvard lend its name to your service. What changes would you make to the pitch deck, and would you suggest to pitch to Harvard? So, you know, I think what you're looking for is some kind of credential or endorsement of some sort, and that might be a pitch for a partner in that regard. So remember, we talked about there are 3 types of pitches. One is direct to your customers. There's another one for investment, and then of course for partners. And for partners, you know, when you're thinking about these, you have to be looking for alignment or mission alignment when it comes to the product or service, and it has to serve a common a common denominator or a consumer at the end of the day. So I would be thinking about ways that you could align with a Harvard in that way, and making sure that whatever product or service that you're pitching to them is actually going to meet the needs of their consumers as well. And that's that it's not that different from credentialing when we were at P&G and we're saying 4 out of 5 dentists would would use or recommend Crest. In many ways, it's something in it for the dentist, but there's also something in it for us. So that's how I think about endorsements, and we certainly see a lot of companies looking for endorsements from others, other organizations. It's a good strategy point because it becomes a reason to believe, or an RTB, when it comes to your product or service. Sergio has a question here on product problem setup. How would you frame it when your product is a significant improvement versus the industrial product, but it's not something consumers are screaming about today? But when they try the product, they realize they have a problem, and they reward that. So a premium food product is a good example. This is a question really when it comes to the value equation, and we talked about the story of a consumer, and when a consumer has in that story, let me pull that up here real quick for you. Here we go. Okay, and remember we talked about a consumer is in this story, and what typically consumers don't know what they don't know. And just like in our days at P&G, they cannot necessarily articulate what the problem is until they see the solution. And I still talk about Swiffer as a great example of that, of course, in our days at P&G, and how consumers wouldn't be able to tell you what a Swiffer is or why it's a better product than mopping the floor. But when they see it and they start to try it, and that's where trial becomes really important, is that they see that the alternative to fixing up a bucket of chemicals and water and this solution, and then having a mop that you have to wring out, and that whole rigmarole of doing that, there is a significant improvement that's there. And part of the challenge of talking about that story is that you have to then show what that looks like today, or what that is today, before people can see a brighter future. And so that is part of the journey and as a storyteller, you as a founder and your product, you need to then show that, hey, this is how it was done before. And with your product, this is how it can be solved. And it's not just a problem that you've had, but it's something that everybody out there, once they see this, is going to realize this is something that they need in their life. So that's how we think about the problem, is setting up the problem in a way that's going to be meaningful for you and the consumers and everybody else. And then once you're able to show that, then you can show that there's probably a lot of investment opportunity for that. Okay, so Philip has a question. What do you think about selling to the customer through a channel like Amazon? I think Amazon is a great way to get products out there. Of course, if you're a CPG company, it's going to give you reach that you probably don't necessarily have today. Now, I think what's important when it comes to using intermediaries like Amazon or any of these is that you also have to recognize that how you market the product, and there are ways to pay for ad services, and how your product gets higher into the algorithm. And a lot of that really comes through content that's generated. And I see a ton of content out there for products that are, let's say, drop shipped, that influencers are picking up these days. And those influencers will create some quirky video and people dancing around and so forth, and then they show the product and find the link here. And all they're doing is that they're generating traffic to their Amazon page or wherever that link is going. And that's part of the challenge is as a marketer, it's really about getting enough awareness of the product and getting the engagement in the funnel for those consumers to purchase. So Amazon's a good channel. I think you just got to be wary of how you get people there, and then the margins that they're going to take on your product. Because as we said before, as however many times you have to hire a distributor for it, they're going to take a percentage. Could you share a vision statement of small size successful companies and a B2B? I don't have one off the top of my head, but I can tell you that there's certainly elements of a vision statement. As I've shared before, it's got to be bigger than us here and what we're doing today. And I always think about the Elon Musk statement simply because, when he says he wants to help humans occupy Mars, it's this idea that it's very futuristic, but you think about the mission is there's certain aspects of it, and it's everything from Tesla, which is about electric cars. There's Solar City, which he's an investor in. There's also, of course, SpaceX, and all of those key components are smaller missions that are going towards this whole idea of sustaining life on a third planet. Everything from launching recyclable rockets, simply because landing a rocket on another interplanetary interstellar travel, it's something that hasn't been done before. Rockets used to just go one way and then they would dump in the ocean. So you think about those type of things and your ability to then articulate the building blocks of your overall vision with the key components that you're building today. And that's where, if you can make it aspirational, we talk about brand equity statements, they always start with something that's attainable as well as aspirational. And so attainable in mission, aspirational in vision. Okay. Yes, Laura.
Marvin, we're very close to the hour. We can continue answering questions, but I'd like to launch this poll and I'll be running the poll, but you can continue answering questions. I'll ask just people to answer my questions on the poll, if possible, please.
Yep. And as you're thinking about that, I'll try to capture one more meaningful question. And then what I can do is I can through Slack, I would just invite people to go to the Slack channel, because what would be great is then I could take some of these questions, throw them out there, and then I can answer some of them on Slack too. And it gives us a way for all of us to interact, because I'm sure other people have some thoughts about each of these things. Okay.
Can you see the poll? I have been asking, which of the following could you consider yourself? A founder, an investor, both, neither? Are you guys seeing the poll now? Do you see it, Marvin?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Well, I have no responses. Oh, okay. Now they started responding. Now continue with your answers, please. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So the last question I'll take here is there a better moment to raise capital, or are there many moments depending upon the stage of the startup, how you should pitch, and how should the pitch be adjusted to each? I think raising capital, there's certainly timing is a big aspect of raising money, and a couple years ago was probably the worst time you could raise capital. Right now things are actually on the upswing. The market's doing a lot better. People are feeling like they're overall, people feel a little bit richer than they did a year ago, if you will. Investors especially feel have more of an appetite for investment, and the market's done so well that they've decided to take some money off the table so that they can invest in alternatives. So now is probably a good time to go raise capital. Now the question is, though it might be good for investors, for them, is it good for you to go raise capital? And I think, well, all that depends upon your traction. And at different stages of a startup life, I think one of the most important things is to show that there's sustained growth in the company and that there's improving metrics. And so as you start designing your scorecard, what's important about that scorecard is those meaningful metrics that you're looking at, and we talked about a number of them today, is being able to then show and demonstrate to your investors, like my cat here. My cat was just screaming. So what you want to demonstrate to those investors is that you said this is what you're going to do, this is what you've done, and this is where it's going. And being able to show that level of growth over time is going to be really important. So I think there's no pat answer for when's the right time to raise capital for a startup, but I would say build on the strengths that you have. When you've said that you've done it and you can show it, you've done it, that's usually the best time to start raising money. Okay, so I know that's about all the time we have for today's session. Laura, is there anything else you want to talk?
Well, no, we still have people answering the poll, and they are here. I don't know if we can have 5 more minutes of 2 or 3 questions you want to answer.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm totally fine
Like,
for that too.
have
Okay, so the one question here, is there funding for CPG ideas? Yes, there's absolutely funding for CPG ideas. I think one of the things you want to think about is finding the right venture capital groups. There's one here in Cincinnati that focuses on CPG. And if you haven't used something like ChatGPT or Bard or whatnot, it's a great way to just find and search for groups that are focused on consumer goods, and starting to generate a sales funnel for yourself, or a CRM, as what we like to say, is your CRM for your customers that you're currently going after with your product. You have to generate a CRM for investors too. And that CRM might include the top 10 CPG venture capital funds across the US or globally for that matter. And just starting to build that and start to pitch and get on their calendars. Venture capital is always looking for opportunities there. And CPG is one of those areas that it's a proven model. And as long as there's a good opportunity there, then there's definitely funding for CPGs. Another question here. I love this question. Any extra advice about pitching as an older entrepreneur, and female? I'd say that don't let age discourage you in any ways. Yes, it can be very tough, especially in the SaaS world, software as a service. But I can tell you, it really depends upon your team and the credibility of that team, your ability to then champion a product or an idea and surround yourself with the right people who can execute against that is really at the core of our strengths as a company at P&G. It's our ability to lead. And so finding the right other co-founders is going to be really important. And, there's a guy I've been working with for the last 12 years, even before I left P&G. He started coding websites and building websites with me. He still builds websites with me. And, what's awesome about it, he's a younger guy. He's probably 10, 15 years, well, actually he's 12 years younger than I am. And, he's just a pro at it. And what I love about it is the fact that he brings a ton of credibility from a CTO perspective there. That's something I can't code myself out of a box. Well, maybe a little bit of HTML here or there, but certainly he adds a lot of credibility to that. So that's my only advice is be able to find yourself some co-founders who have those skill sets.
I guess we can wrap up here. Is that okay, Marvin?
Yeah, totally.
We're 5 minutes after. We want to thank. Can you go back to the slide with the QR code, please?
Yes.
Marvin, thank you very much. Your wisdom and experience on this, thank you, on this arena is great. We remind you that as a P&G Alumni Business Catapult team, we are trying to connect P&G alums, advisors, investors with entrepreneurs. We believe in the power of networking, and join our community in the Slack channel. And thanks so much for being here. And thanks so much, Marvin, for your wisdom.
It's my pleasure. Thank you guys so much. And look forward to chatting with you.
Let me see how we end this.